Okay, this is a 96 Toyota T100 4-cylinder. I'm showing you on this car because it's the only one I have available. It's almost the same as the Rav. The EGR system is a little different on this. Yeah, there's a few other different things. Check valve here. But basically, here's your vacuum modulator. Your EGR valve is right here. Vacuum switching valve. You can see it kind of dark. It's down here in the intake manifold, so it's actually a little easier to get to than the Rav. Now this video is to help someone out that made a comment, John I believe it was. Sorry that I didn't really get to this earlier, just busy. Keep in mind you're just getting the generic code P0401, and all that is telling you is you have a problem with your EGR system. So just keep that in mind. You're just getting one code. It's telling you something's wrong with the EGR system, and it is a system. You know, you got the modulator, you got the EGR valve, you have the vacuum switching valve down here. So it's all one system. If any one of those things go wrong, it's not going to work right. I know you said you changed the VLC. I know you have a manual transmission. Maybe that's something different. I'm not familiar with that type of engine, if it's a little different than the automatic. I wouldn't imagine that it is, but maybe you're referring to the VSV, which is the vacuum switching valve. I don't know if you changed that. If you didn't, you might want to try that, changing the vacuum switching valve. You know, again, I'm no expert here, but I'm trying to help you out. I know I had, problems with that same code. So just keep in mind, you just have one code, P0401. Just keep that in mind. It has nothing to do with your O2 sensors, your catalytic converter. Over here on most cars, and it should be on the Rav, you have the vacuum hose diagram for your EGR system, which is very helpful for most cases. So there's your vacuum switching valve, and there's your EGR valve. It's showing you how it's all routed. So if you ever mess up where the vacuum lines go, you could kind of refer back to this, how it should go, reconnect it back the right way. So let's make sure your vacuum lines are connected right. That might be one of your issues. Or what you have here is your throttle body. Now all these lines here, basically this creates a vacuum. It's air being sucked into the engine. This is your main, where all your vacuum comes from. So we'll keep that in mind. Now what could happen too, a lot of times your throttle body here, intake, I know you said you cleaned it out with some seafoam, but if it's really bad, seafoam might not do it. Sometimes if it's really carboned up in there, you might want to take these off and clear these ports out with some carb cleaner, throttle body cleaner, because if those get clogged, you're not going to get vacuum to where you need vacuum. And as you see in the Rav video, these vacuum lines get old and cracked, so you also might have a vacuum leak. So inspect your lines and your hoses, all your vacuum hoses on the EGR system, to the modulator, to the EGR valve, to the vacuum switching valve. And one way to do, if they visually look good too, sometimes that could fool you, because they're black, it's dark in the engine bay, you might not be able to see, everything. If you have a vacuum leak, one way to test for it is to have the engine running, spray some carb cleaner on the vacuum lines. If the engine runs any different, you hear the engine noticeably different, hear the engine axle different, because that's because you're sending basically extra fuel, because this is flammable. So that means you have a vacuum leak if you get any change in your engine idle. But you got to be careful, because this is flammable, it's toxic. Don't get it in your eyes or anything. Keep it away from any hot parts, exhaust lines, because you don't want to catch fire. And you got to be careful too, because on the EGR valve there's an exhaust line that connects to the bottom of it. So you got to be careful. You got to be careful with this stuff. So yeah, and also, like I said, you might want to try cleaning out these ports here for your vacuum line, because those could possibly get clogged with carbon. I know you said you changed the EGR valve. I know it probably, since you changed it and you're still getting the same results, you might want to, if you put a new gasket on there, You know, when you changed it, make sure that gasket's okay. You don't want any leaks there. Make sure all your vacuum lines are good. One good way, make sure, I know you said you had a mechanic test it, but you know, the fact is you still have the problem. It's not too expensive to go get a vacuum gauge set like this. Go to Harbor Freight, you know, get one, or eBay, or you know, the auto parts store if it's not too expensive. Get one of these. You know, this will help you out. Basically, the EGR is not activated when the engine's cold. Now, you have to let the engine warm up to operating temperature. The engine warms up, and the computer tells the vacuum switching valve to open, and it sends vacuum to the EGR valve, which, you know, sends exhaust gas back to your intake to get reburned. It's not energized until the engine is at operating temperature, which could, you know, until your thermostat opens on your engine. So with that said, one way to test too that your EGR valve is working, or has the capability of working, is to take off vacuum line off of the throttle body, one that you don't think is, you know, it's not going to hurt the engine, you know, for the little time you're doing it, off of intake here directly to the EGR valve. And if the engine stalls, or, you know, acts a little rough, that means your EGR valve has the capability of working. And if it does that, you probably don't, it's probably not clogged in there. That's one easy way. I know I did that. And also, you could, you know, they give you all these fittings here, extra hose. You might need to buy some extra hose. I know I did. Like this is 5/32 vacuum hose to do your testing. Like it all varies. Like I believe at 2,000 RPM or 3,000, you should have, I don't know, it'll vary. You know, 10 inches of vacuum on your gauge here, which would be on this side. You know, you'll get something like that. You should, if it's working properly, you should get something like that to your EGR valve once the engine is warmed up and you're getting the proper signal. Okay, so what I have here is I have a vacuum gauge hooked up to, I took off the line that went off that went to the EGR valve, and on this T100 it's a little different. Just extra fittings and whatnot, but what I did was there's a T that came with this vacuum kit. This is the original, what went directly to the EGR valve. I just teed in the gauge, and then this other side of the T goes to the EGR valve, so this really won't affect the operation of the engine. This is a good way to test your vacuum to the EGR valve. Whatever way works on the RAV, whatever way you think is best to connect your vacuum gauge to it. And you could also just connect your vacuum gauge directly to this line. That's fine too. You're not going to get any vacuum to the EGR valve until the engine is at operating temperature. So I'm going to go ahead and run this and show you how it should be. Okay, now the engine's running. The engine's still cold. As you see here, we have zero vacuum. So that's how it should be. And once the engine warms up, once the thermostat of the engine opens up, you know the engine's hot, you should get vacuum here. Okay, so keep in mind that the Q port is what goes down to the vacuum switching line, and it goes down to the vacuum switching line, and the vacuum switching valve, and then it's basically just a valve, and it just opens or closes, and it opens when the engine's warmed up at operating temperature. The computer should tell it to do that once the engine's nice and hot, and sends vacuum through the valve to the EGR valve. And you should get with the engine, with it warmed up and moving the throttle to about 2,500 or 3,000 RPM, you should get some kind of vacuum to the EGR valve. And go ahead and do your test there too to see if you're getting vacuum out of this modulator. You should get some kind of movement in the vacuum gauge when you rev the engine to 3,000 RPM or so. So you should get some kind of movement in your vacuum gauge. Hope this helps.